While we wait for everyone to come in, Hannah, can you give me a sign when a good moment would be to start? And welcome everyone. All right. Shall we start? Yeah. Okay, great. Well, welcome everyone. As a small note, I am sharing my screen, so I can actually not see you nor really keep a good eye on the chat. So I'm relying on my colleagues to tell me when anything good pops up. So before we start, I want to get some practical things out of the way. The first one being is that this is being recorded. It's recorded on speaker view. So if you're struggling with a particularly bad hair day, it's fine. You probably won't be in the image. Personally, I like to see faces to the names. So if you have questions and you want to talk, please feel free to unmute yourself and put the video on. But if you feel particularly shy today, you can also just put your messages in the chat. So just for your information. As was already asked in the chat, for everyone who's joining, it would be great if you can perhaps write down your name and which organization you are from in the chat so that we know who's listening in. And lastly, there's plenty of time for the Q&A at the end of the webinar. But in the meantime, if at any point you have a burning question, just put them in the chat so we can make sure that we cover those. All right, so I think that's the most important messages. Please do interrupt me, Hannah or Charlotte, if I forget something. But otherwise, we can just get started. So thank you for joining this webinar about gamification, more specifically about using gamification to improve online engagement with SRHR information and education. So what we want to do today is go through the results of a research pilot that we have conducted, funded by ShareNet International. And we also want to show you a little bit more about how we did the project design and the recommendations in case you're also interested in experimenting with gamification. We have some really, hopefully, helpful recommendations for you. I'm not here alone. I have some colleagues here in the group with me. I'll be hosting this webinar, but I will also ask my colleagues to jump in every once in a while. And I will introduce them as we move through this webinar. Okay. So Charlotte, just a question for you. If anything pops up in the chat, just feel free to interrupt if anything important comes up. All right, so let me see. Charlotte, why don't we just directly start with you? So Charlotte is my SRHR specialist colleague, and she will explain a little bit more about the background of her organization so that you have a better sense of how this gamification pilot was run. Charlotte, all yours.
Thank you, Elianne. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here today. And I've seen a few familiar faces, so that's great too. So RNW Media, we are an NGO based in Hilversum in the Netherlands, and we work at the intersection between digital media and international development. How do we do that? We do that by building digital communities for social change. A digital community is a place where young people can come together online for a purpose, to interact and participate and learn. We work in 3 thematic areas, the first one being economic inclusion through our community called In the Works. The second one being social cohesion and inclusive governance, and that's through our Citizens' Voice digital community. And the third, which we're here to talk about today, is on the focus of SRHR, and that's the Love Matters digital community. Next slide, please, Elianne. Thank you. So at Love Matters, we really focus on providing open, honest, pleasure-positive sexual reproductive health and rights information to young people in restrictive settings around the world. Our target age group is the age of 18 to 30. And what we do is focus on providing young people information on sex, love, and relationships when, where, and how they want it. We work to provide young people with the knowledge to make informed decisions around their sexual reproductive health and to pursue enjoyable and safe sexual experiences. As you can see here, we use multiple digital channels to build these online communities. So we have the Love Matters websites, which provide the science-based sexual reproductive health and rights information and education, but we also use other context-specific digital channels. So you can see here we use Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and you can also see on the bottom right-hand corner is our Let's Talk, which is our interactive discussion board. And I think what really makes Love Matters unique is the opportunity to discuss with peers, but also to reach out to experts through direct messaging, either on the Facebook page or the discussion board. All the spaces in Love Matters are actively and inclusively moderated by our teams of expert moderators around the world to ensure that young people in all their diversity feel welcome and open to express their concerns or ask questions. If needed, then our expert moderators can refer young people to further SRHR products and services. So in 2011, so this year we are celebrating our 10-year anniversary. We started our first platform in India. And since then, we've grown to a collaborative network of 7 platforms around the world. So as you can see here, we have Love Matters China, Love Matters Kenya, Amour Afrique in the DRC, Love Matters Niger in Nigeria, Love Matters Arabic based in Egypt, and Hablemos de Sex y Amor in Mexico. So the Love Matters Global Network, since 2019, we've been working to transition to sustainability based on a social franchise model. And this is where independent partners take responsibility for implementing the Love Matters programs. We're working to scale up our collective impact by really kind of working to facilitate collaboration and the exchange of knowledge, information, and innovation among and between the network members. The network itself ensures consistency in the implementation, but also quality in terms of our health content and our digital infrastructure. It also offers the opportunity to pilot ideas, innovations, and if these are successful, then we can offer them to the rest of the network members. We do have quite a significant reach across the Love Matters Global Network. Over the last 2 years, so between the beginning of 2019 and the end of 2020, we had over 84 million page views on the Love Matters websites, and we have 8.7 million Facebook followers. So I think you can imagine we really have a unique ability to gather large-scale insights into young people's sexual reproductive health, rights, and their wants, interests, and behaviors. So back in 2019, we did a comparative web analysis of the content on Love Matters. And we kind of looked at the more risk reduction focused content and the more pleasure focused content. So the risk reduction content is the more educational content, for example, on STI testing, treatment and care. And what we saw, and I don't think this will come as a great surprise to many of you, was that the pleasure focused content was nearly 1.5 times more popular. So, as you all know, working in the digital world is a process of kind of constantly evolving, testing, innovating, and trying out new things. So we've been rethinking ways to share the more educational content on the website in ways that really engage young people more. So we've been doing this in a few ways. One of the ways we've been doing this is by trialing more visual content. We've been investing a lot in animation. But also, as we're here to talk about today, we've been working to pilot gamification as a way to increase young people's engagement. So, as Elianne mentioned, we applied last year for a ShareNet small grant to hold this research pilot to really investigate if gamifying online sexuality education content can increase young people's engagement. And I'm really pleased to share the exciting results of this pilot with you. So back over to you, Elianne, to dive in. Thank you.
Thanks, Charlotte. Yeah, so as you mentioned, we found this 2 years ago. It's 2021. I keep forgetting that we're in 2021. So in 2019, we had this research done, and realizing that risk reduction topics are still fairly important to include in sex education, we wanted to experiment a little bit more intensively with how we can make this type of content more engaging. So gamification was a topic in the back of the minds of multiple team members, both at RNW Media in Hilversum, but also at RNW Media Love Matters teams in different countries. So this topic became very quickly our favorite topic to explore. And thanks to the ShareNet funding, we could actually trial this. So the research question that we developed is fairly simple and straightforward. Does gamifying online sexuality education content increase young people's engagement with sexual reproductive health and rights information? So with this question in the back of our mind, I want to move on to perhaps good to start with a definition of gamification. Now, this is where I'm a little bit interested in you as the audience of this webinar. The definition of gamification is the application of game principles in a non-game environment. And I know that most of you probably also work for SRHR organizations or perhaps other types of nonprofits, but I would like to know what your experience has been so far with gamification. So we have a little poll, which Hannah will, I believe, put in. Oh, that's perfect, Hannah, thank you. So if you don't mind, can you just include your answers in the poll? And for those of you who are saying yes, I would love it if you can add maybe a couple of examples, just short descriptions of how you've tried gamification. So just put it in the chat if you like. And Charlotte, if you can just keep an eye if there's any interesting examples, just please mention them. All right. So we see here a majority of the people says no, a couple of yes, and a couple of I'm not sure, which I understand. Anything in the chat so far?
Not so far.
All right.
Oh, yeah, we just got an example. Quizzes in app chatbots.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, then you will probably recognize what we're going to be talking about today. All right. Great. So most of you haven't. That's interesting. And some of you have. I see. So just as a household thing, I get messages that people are in the waiting room. Hannah, are you taking those on or should I admit them? Okay, so I think we're here. So the majority says no, and some of you say yes, and some of you say I'm not sure. So that makes sense. Anything in the chat? Any other examples other than the quizzes?
Yep, polls and AMAs, gamification element in chatbots, and an
Excellent.
online tool to administer a workshop in classrooms about online sexual violence, which includes quizzes and role play games.
Excellent. So there is some experience here. So Hannah, can you maybe just immediately launch the second poll as well? Because this is a follow-up question. So have you ever used polls, Mentimeter, Kahoot, Mural, similar applications? Now, I know with COVID going on in the last year, I cannot imagine the majority saying no to this question, because I think we've all been in plenty of Mentimeters lately. So any type of applications like polling, quizzing, mural, visualization. Yeah. So here we see a lot more people saying yes. And the reason why I'm asking you this question is because when we talk about gamification, a lot of people tend to think about very big projects around designing games. Whereas in fact, gamification is nothing more but applying these basic game principles. And these principles relate to challenging people, relate to giving them an option to make a choice, to interact, to have a sense of autonomy in there. So polls and Mentimeter, the poll like I'm using now, is also a form of gamification. Now you might think, what's the game here? But it's really about giving you a sense of control that you get to put in the answer. And Mentimeter works in the same way. And I added Mural here as well, because Mural and Miro, and there's a bunch of those type of visual sticky note apps, what they do is they give you a way where you can put in your own input. You can visualize it nicely. I remember all of the heart and star stamps that you can put on sticky notes. So all these things are examples of ways to increase and enhance the feeling of engagement that people have with whatever type of content you want to convey. So we're going to leave it at that. Now, with that in mind, gamification has very strong links to behavior psychology. And if you're anything like me, you might not have been, very well aware of behavioral psychology. I had to dive into this for gamification. But I want to take you through the basic concept of the self-determination theory, because you will better understand why gamification is such an added value to educational programs. Now, self-determination theory is based around the idea that in order for a person, an individual person, to be engaged and motivated to make a decision or to take action or to change their behavior, there are three basic psychological needs that need to be fulfilled. And the first one is autonomy. It's the idea of having a choice, that you are in control. The second one is competence, which relates to that you feel effective, like you have achieved something or you've mastered something. And the third one is relatedness, which sounds a little bit abstract, but it means that you feel connected to other people, usually a group of peers. So self-determination theory says, as long as you have these three basic needs fulfilled, that's when people are engaged and motivated to actually change their behavior. And you see where this comes in useful when you talk about education. So if we apply this to the educational field, we get gamified learning theory, which is based on the idea that gamification can strongly affect learning outcomes by leveraging people's natural desire to play, achieve, compete, control, and interact. And this is actually where you see the elements of the self-determination theory coming in, because the sense of autonomy, control, you can see it here, controlling and interacting. The sense of competence you can find in achievement, and the sense of relatedness is found in competing with other people. And what gamified learning theory does is adds the playfulness, the element of play, which often we associate with children or young people. But the truth is, and I know some of you are probably also big gaming fans, I know some of my colleagues are, adults are equally interested in playing in different forms. So before I move on, I want to ask my colleague Camille, who is our digital content specialist, to jump in. So Camille, I hope you're there. I cannot see you, so please unmute yourself. Can you maybe tell us a little bit more about why and how you integrated gamification in the Love Matters content strategy?
Hi, Elianne. Yeah, I'm here.
Hey.
Thanks for the question. So actually, we were in the process of updating our CSE content, so comprehensive sexual education content. And I remember having really recurring conversations with some of our Love Matters community managers, asking them if they saw any difference within their community regarding certain SRHR topics after a year or so. And to that, a lot of them answered that, some people just, like they read the posts that we post, but they don't really go through the articles. They just check the introductory post and they stop at that. So as a content specialist, it was somehow some sad news. But most importantly, it was actually the sign that we had to improve the format of our content in order for our audience to actually interact with it, to get something out of it or learn from it. And by not reading our articles in their full length, our users were actually telling us something that we had to take on board in our content strategy. And that feedback confirmed something that we all already know by experience as well since childhood, that we all learn in really different ways. There are different learning styles out there, different way of assimilating knowledge, you know. So with that in mind, when it comes to SRHR, reading articles, watching videos, even localized, seemed way too passive somehow for our audience and incomplete for such a field that is all about behavior and skills improvement. So this is when we got increasingly interested in experiential learning. So what is experiential learning? It's pretty straightforward. So many theories propose that we can learn from our experiences. Learners have to do something, to think about it, to pull out some key points and apply them to their life. So firstly, the learner sense and absorbs the information that is coming from a concrete experience. And after they reflect on its significance and they can build some sort of cognitive models that they can test in practice. So, you know, in their love life, relationship, sexual life. So this is when gamification of SRHR came into play. We wanted to create and provide a space for learners, so that is to say our audience, to try out something new, to fail softly, let's say, by failing into quizzes, for instance, which doesn't have as big of an impact as in real life, and to reflect on these experiences and arriving by themselves to new conclusion and think about how they would apply these learnings to their relationship, love life, sex life. And with this view, we wanted our users to learn for themselves with a little bit of help and assistance, that is to say, gamification, rather than have it done to or for them, a full-length article. So it seemed to be not only a great fit for our SRHR goals by improving behavior and skills of our audience, but also for our audience needs, who were, for some of them, not reading the full-length article and they wanted something more engaging. So it was a kind of win-win situation.
Yeah, I really like how you described the difference between sort of passive and active content. And I think a lot of people who are experienced in the educational field, regardless of which thematic area, will recognize that young people and adults as well are more eager to learn when they feel like it's coming from their own motivation, when it's not passively offered to them, but actively. And I think the failing softly is a very important thing, especially in the field of SRHR, where we all know that the difficult choices need to be sometimes made. And if you don't have all the information available, that can have severe consequences. And by adding gamification as an element for them to test and experiment and fail without having very negative consequences, I think can be hugely empowering for them. So thanks. And maybe one follow-up question, if I may, because for RNW Media to do this pilot, what do you think made this a worthwhile pilot? Like, what about the context did you feel like this is worth trying? And I'm asking also from the perspective of other organizations who would want to experiment with it. What was the most important thing that made you say, yes, this is what we're going to do?
So to me, this pilot was only worthwhile if we were actually able to implement it successfully, right? And for that, we checked the requirements of a successful gamification and the ones of successful experiential learning, and somehow they aligned pretty harmoniously. So it was pretty straightforward to check if we were the proper organization to do it, or if we were able to actually deliver this project that we wanted to commit to. So if I can go through the requirements really quickly, gamification and experiential learnings both draws on the learner's personal experience. This means that to be engaging, to trigger this really inner motivation that we just talked about, the quizzes and self-assessment journeys had to feel relevant and relatable. This was really like one of the main key points. And for that, we needed in-house, so a content specialist, an SRHR expert, and also, really important, teams who actually have the local expertise to ensure that the localization of the content was actually successful and that it would be a great fit to the local context. So that was one key point. The other one was, of course, creating the games themselves with developers and UX designer to make sure that the games would actually work with different internet connections, would be mobile first, so really adapted to the different devices that our different users are using. So that was also another really important point. A third point was really the role of the engagement specialist. So it's one thing to create the quizzes and to have good content, but then you need to make sure that you actually distribute these games in a way that is engaging and that you encourage your audience to participate in it and that you have a full, a fully fleshed strategy around that, right? Because that's what's the most important. Otherwise, it just stays on your website and no one ever checked them. So that was really, really important to have a solid engagement specialist in-house. And finally, we had to set different goals for these quizzes, different metrics, what we want to achieve with these, and to monitor them consistently to adapt our product in an iterative way, which means that we would go back every time thanks to the learning that we get from our audiences or from the different specialists in-house and improve on what we are building. So we needed, of course, a PML specialist in-house as well. And therefore, all these people in-house needed to be kind of constantly available to give feedback and to improve based on the feedback received from one another. So it was really, really important to have a solid digital infrastructure to basically request the different skills and competencies at all time and be able to improve our product constantly.
Thanks. And as you're saying that, I just realized I've been introducing you as our content specialist and Charlotte as our SRHR specialist, and I completely forgot to introduce myself. Yes, like you said, I'm the PMEL, the monitoring and evaluation specialist for RNW Media, and I was in charge of the research design for this project, which is why I'm presenting today, just as a bit of background information. Thanks, Camille, because this is a really nice segue into the next part about the process. And you might wonder, why am I going to spend time explaining the process to you? Because it might not be the most exciting part. But there are two reasons. First of all, if I'm right, there's probably a couple of you in the audience who are interested in starting out their own projects and experimentation. And I'm hoping this gives you a couple of really nice sort of things to hold on to if you want to start out and make the most of the lessons that we have learned as part of the process. Secondly, the project team, as a project team, we very strongly believe that half of the reason why this pilot was successful is because of the project design, the process that we took. And this is going to come back a couple of times, but I just want to quickly run you through how we set up this project. Because with anything, and it's not just for gamification, this relates to anything to do with innovation. If you want to innovate without having unnecessary big risks that you might fail and lose your investment, then you want to start small. So with this in mind, we took inspiration from two things: design thinking and human-centered design. Now, some of you might already be familiar with this, but both of these approaches have two key things that we wanted to consider. The first being, which is already in the name, human-centered design. It's the idea that you don't just design projects from your own logical ideas and the thoughts that you have, but you really take the perspective of the people that you're producing this for. So in our case, the young people in the countries where we work, that you really try to look at this from their perspective. And you do this by really discovering and empathizing with that audience before you even start defining what type of solution you want to come up with. And the second element in this is the approach of iteration. An iteration in this case means that you sort of repeat certain steps to make it better. And you can see that here in the prototyping and testing. I know this looks like a perfect cycle, but the reality is that you have multiple iterations within these steps. So what you get is that with prototyping and testing, and you'll see that in our design as well, you design your project in such a way that you don't just have a beginning and you implement it and you finish, because if most of you work for NGOs, you will probably be familiar with this. We have a tendency to start programs, implement them, and at the very end, we look back and we evaluate. And what happens is that from the lessons learned, you don't always get to improve the project itself because it's already done. And you, with a bit of luck, you can take it along to the new project. But with this approach, you make sure that you adapt and adjust in the implementation time so that you can actually improve it. And by the end of the project, you have a better product or program, however you want to develop it. So if we apply this to the approach that we took, I'm just going to show you a couple of examples of what we did. So the discovery phase for us already started with the 2019 research paper that Charlotte just explained, where we found out that pleasure-focused content was so much more popular than risk reduction-focused content. Then Camille performed the content analysis that she just explained, which then reiterated that, you know, a lot of young people tend to just not really read those articles, even if they click on them. And then in addition, we did a little bit of a desk review as part of our proposal writing for the ShareNet funding, in which we tried to get a more of a theoretical establishment for what we wanted to do. So the behavioral psychology, the experiential learning, those type of backgrounds that you know, basically you know what you're doing. You're not just randomly trying out something new. And in the definition phase, and this I cannot emphasize enough, clear project boundaries was so essential for this project. And I'm sure you probably also recognize this. As NGOs, we have a tendency to be very ambitious and to think very big, which is okay in some cases. But when you're trying out innovations and trying out new things that you haven't done before, you're not sure how well it's going to work, then you're going to have to be very, very careful with how ambitious you're going to start. And the lucky thing is, in hindsight, the lucky thing is that the ShareNet funding was 10,000. It was fairly limited, which meant that we had to really reel in our ambitions and become a little bit more practical in terms of what we could do with that money. So to give you an example of what that looked like, we decided to go with 3 knowledge quizzes and 3 self-assessment journeys. Now in the chat, when I did the poll and there were some answers in the chat, you can already see there are different formats of gamification that you can use. There's not just one format of gamification. It's not just about quizzes. There's many, many other things that you can try. And we would have liked to try all of them, but we had to limit ourselves. So we chose to go with 2 fairly similar type of gamification formats. The first being a knowledge quiz, and you can see that one here. How much do you know about STI? So this is a test, a bit of a challenging quiz where you can have right answers and wrong answers. And at the end of the quiz, you get a score and you're invited to share that score and see, you know, if you know more than your friends or something like that. But then we also had 3 self-assessment journeys, and you see that one on the right side here. So self-assessment journeys are not about right or wrong answers or getting a certain score. Self-assessment journeys are about your personal situation. And what it does in a quiz format, it asks you questions about your personal situation. You choose the option that fits best, and then you get a personal tailored advice. So in this case, you can see this example on the right is about what do I need to do if I've forgotten a pill? So here you get questions about whether you've had sexual intercourse in the last few days, whether how many pills you've forgotten or how much time was in between. And based on what you choose, you get an advice on whether you need to go see a doctor, do a test, or whether you're probably okay. So you might wonder what's the game part in this self-assessment. And again, I want to emphasize it's not about necessarily about creating games. It's about adding sense of control and interaction so that young people don't have to passively engage with information, but can actively take control in what they want to get from you. We also limited the content that we wanted to try out gamification on. We have a lot of different content categories, but we had to make a choice. So we went with two very classic risk reduction topics, contraception and STIs. And then we added a more general sex and sexuality topic to it. And lastly, we looked around and we asked our various global network, the Love Matters Global Network members, to see which one of them felt that they had the expertise, the capacity, and the motivation to take part in this pilot. And 4 platforms emerged from that: Love Matters Kenya, Amour Afrique in DRC, Hablemos de Sexo y Amor in Mexico, and Love Matters Arabic in Egypt. So we had 4 platforms, which is also nice because then you can do a bit of a comparative analysis to see whether you get the same type of results across different platforms. So going back to the process, having defined very clear project boundaries, we also research quiz applications. Now, Camille just mentioned, we have the capacity in-house to design the quizzes and develop them and integrate them on their websites completely by ourselves without the use of third-party applications. But we actually made a different choice. And again, this has to do with risk calculation. We thought to ourselves, we don't know yet how successful this pilot is going to be. So rather investing a lot of resources in creating something that might not work in the end, we decided to use a prototype with a third-party application to see if that works. And if it did, to then maybe take the step to design it in-house. So the most important step here is the co-creation of SRHR content. And Charlotte, because you were in the lead, maybe it's nice if you could explain a little bit what we mean with co-creation of SRHR source content.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Elianne. So the co-creation of the SRHR source content was done by myself, a doctor from the Love Matters Arabic team, and an SRHR moderator from the Love Matters Niger team, Emma, who is also here on the call today. And basically, we wanted to co-create the content to make sure that it was consistent, but also that the questions themselves could be applied across all the platforms that were taking part in the pilot. So after being created, all the questions were then also reviewed by each of the online editors of the platforms that were taking part. Following that, they were translated and localized. So for example, if we mention a family planning, the contraceptive pill, then we'd use the local brand name for that to make sure that young people really kind of resonated with the content.
So as you mentioned, Ema-Olori is probably, I hope, Ema-Olori, are you in the call? Because you are from Love Matters Niger, and you were actually instrumental in this co-creation process. So hopefully you're there. And if so, can I ask you, from your perspective, what the added value was of this co-creation process?
Thank you, Elianne. I am here.
Yay.
Great. Hello, everyone. It's really nice to be here, and thank you for explaining all of the process. For co-creation, really, just like Charlotte mentioned, it was important to understand the different in which young people understand and interact around SRHR content. With working with people from different regions, it was important to note the differentials in context, the differentials in cultural annotations. And if this is to be implemented on that kind of scale where there are, of course, different regions and different understandings of young people, it's very crucial to localize to what the young people in that region or in that country understand in their sexual health matters. In Nigeria, for example, the emergency contraceptive pill, which of course in other countries have names, is locally known by its brand name, even though that's not the only brand. So a young girl may walk into a pharmacy or over the counter and say, I want a pack of Postinor. but there are several other brand names for emergency contraceptives. However, because that has been localized and it's so understandable, it's the easiest to reach to, everyone gets that. So in that process of co-creating, we want to be able to sort of fine-tune and create a baseline for young people to understand what we're talking about, but then also impact the learning of what is the global standard. And that's where, you know, in the application process and when it's being used, the young person can answer questions and get to improve their learning process in differentiating between a brand and what an emergency contraceptive is specifically. So that's really the co-creation benefits, or at least one of it. But all of those sexual behaviors from the different regions create a baseline that can then be localized and implemented per country or per region.
Thanks, Emma. This is very helpful. And also to add my own perspective from a monitoring and evaluation perspective, what was particularly convenient about this co-creation process is that you find this balance between standardizing so that it's very nice to very easy to measure and compare these analytics coming out of it, which you will show in the next part about results, while at the same time making sure that it is localized enough so that it actually reaches the people that you want to reach with it. So having said that, the next step around designing was very much focused around translating and contextualization. That's also what Emma just gave a couple of examples of. And then, of course, the engagement strategy. Now, Camille already mentioned this very shortly before, but I want to dive a little bit into it because we found that engagement strategies are consistently overlooked when it comes to trialing new innovative tools like gamification. So with us is Gabriella, our engagement specialist. And Gabriella, if you're there, would you mind telling us a little bit more about why this engagement strategy is super important if you want to try out something like gamification?
Yes, hi Elianne, I'm here. So like Camille already said, your content and your engagement strategy, they need to be in alignment for you to be able to run a successful pilot like this one. And games, they should not be just thrown on your website and hopefully the users are gonna find them there. So because social media, especially on Facebook, it's very strong among our communities, we advise the teams to have a process in which they are going to share that, well, some kind of a way to nudge users to find these quizzes online. And for this, we advise them to keep consistency, because that would also help us in terms of collecting data and analyze if things are happening or not, working well or not. And we also advise them to have to play with the copy of their text. So they could explicitly say, hey, there's a game here, come here to play, or they could just drop a content, a link out there in which when the user clicked and landing on the website, they would find a game on the page, and they could interact further with the content. Also important to say that we together, Elianne and I, we sat down and we work on the metrics that we were going to be evaluating. And this is also part of the engagement strategy, because we look at the tool that we're going to be working with, we look at the information that we could gather from this tool. Then we followed up with the implementations that were required in terms of Facebook Pixels, Google Tag Manager, and so on. And we knew what we could get. So every week we could go and perform a quick evaluation, see if things were working or not. I see in the chat there is a question saying that human-centered design is usually very time-consuming. I think it depends. If you have a team with clear responsibilities, with this solid process, like we're going to meet once a week, we're going to evaluate this and that. I think it's the opposite. It's not time consuming. It's actually very efficient because we can also develop later on based on these iterations. I just want to give one example of iterations that we did during the process. We noticed that at some point users were landing on these gamified pages, but they were not necessarily playing the game because they didn't see the game straight away. So we did a quick implementation of a button, which comes after the call, after the main text on the, not the main text, after the introductory text that is there on the page, there was a button, take the quiz. And that was a very simple, straightforward implementation, which increased the number of people playing the quiz in the end.
Yeah, I think that's a great example. And to slightly refer back to the human-centered design comment, it can be time consuming if it's not integrated in your general organizational approach. The point we're making here, and I have to say that I was surprised to find that this worked out so well. So I'm not going to pretend like I invented this, but I just want to point out that for us, the discovery phase, so this place here, this is something that at the time was not directly linked to gamification as a defined solution. This was a research paper that we did as part of an ongoing research agenda that we have in an organization. The content analysis was part of Camille's ongoing responsibilities as a content specialist. And the desk review was only when we decided to explore gamification further. So what I'm trying to say with that is that if you, in your organization, have an approach where you are regularly collecting information on what your audience is interested in, then this human-centered design actually becomes way more easier, because you're consistently sort of following up with your audience's needs. And then the only thing you have to do is explore and define different solutions for that. So don't be too taken aback by the complexity of human-centered design. And very shortly, because Gabriella already mentioned some of this, the prototyping and testing phase, for the most important points here is that we had weekly evaluations. Now, this might sound a little bit scary to you, but we had a project team of roughly 5 people, and we would just very quickly come together every week, look at the data and see whether anything was lagging behind, comparing different platforms, realizing that this take the quiz button, this very, very simple and easy button, was such a nice little addition that we implemented it within 2 days. And there were other adjustments as well, just very quickly seeing, does it look all right? Does it look all right on mobile? Does it look all right on the web browser? Can we adjust it? Oh, there's a typo somewhere, let's remove it. So these very, very quick iterations to improve your product. And then at the end, of course, we had a final analysis and evaluation. And this is where we get to the fun part. So before I show you the results, so you might have already seen them on the infographic, I'm gonna let you get a bit of a taste, and I'm gonna ask Charlotte to be the quiz master here. It's time to play a little bit. So Charlotte, do you want to take over?
Thanks, Elianne. So just to say, there's a couple of questions in the chat. Can you see them now? Maybe.
Oh yeah, now I can see them, but help me out here. What do I?
There's a question around the HCD process, and I think Gabriella answered that. There's also a question about how users share their quiz scores with their friends.
Oh, yes, that's a great question. Would you mind if I come back to that a little bit later?
Yeah, and there's also a question asking how young people were involved in the co-creation process, and I think this is a really good question. So the Love Matters online editors that were all involved in the co-creation process are all young people themselves, and then they actually had all the question reviewed by their super user groups, so groups of young people in the countries in which they work. And following that, they were kind of adapted and tweaked. I think it has to be fair. I think the co-creation of the SRHR source content was probably the most time-intensive activity out of all the pilot, but it was definitely worth that investment.
Cool. And I now see indeed the question also about how long the total process took to develop the gamified product. I have to admit, I don't know the number of weeks by heart. The implementation period was 6 weeks. The development period took a little bit longer because we invested quite a lot of time in the co-creation process. But I would say we did a lot of things at the same time in sort of various phases. I would say in total 2 months, maybe. Yeah, about 2 months. Yeah.
Okay, it wouldn't be a gamification webinar without some kind of quiz. So, can you all see my screen okay?
Yes, but we cannot see the code that is needed.
No, that'll come up next, I think.
All right, cool.
So we decided to share with you our most successful quiz, which is entitled, Are You a Sexpert? So if you can all type in, or grab your mobile phones to start with, and just type in the browser. You don't need to download an app, but just type in the browser lessonup.app.
And it's perhaps good to mention that it's not the full quiz. The actual quiz is a little bit longer. We've just taken a sample to let you taste of what it looks like. And of course, the quiz that we use is in a different application because we're using the Lesson Up now because it's just a lot more fun to see each other's results. But the actual quiz, which we can show you in a screenshot later, is integrated in our websites. And it's just meant for individual people to play and get their scores.
So I can see people rolling in now. Obviously, you need to enter the PIN code, which is 831597.
Oh, look at that. It's coming. Is there 2 Ailey's? Did I accidentally duplicate myself, or is there another Ailey in the room? That would be fun.
So we'll just give it a few more moments.
And then we just get started.
Right in the chat, and we'll try and help you.
Can people still join if we start?
I think so. But you can also just watch along.
Hey, Elizabeth, you're the other Ailey. Nice. Let's compete. Maybe we can just start. It's in English, by the way. Apologies for everyone who is not as comfortable with English.
But on the Love Matters websites, obviously, we have the quiz in French on and in Spanish on Hablemos de Sexy Amor. And in Kenya, it's a mixture between English and Kiswahili. And obviously in Egypt in Arabic. So if you do want to interact with the quiz in those languages, then feel free to access our websites. All right, so I think we'll start. Like I said, this is just a taster of the quizzes that we developed. So here goes. On average, how long does it take for a woman to orgasm? A, 6 minutes, B, 25 minutes, C, 13 minutes, or D, 40 minutes? Answers rolling in.
Sound is so pressuring, the TikTok sound.
In their mind, I see.
All right. So how long do they have?
So, I mean, you get points for speed and for the correct answer.
Oh, you get points for speed. You should have started by saying that.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so gonna move on now. One more person left to go.
Yes.
And the correct answer is, I see most of you got it right. C, minutes. So, which of these activities can increase your sex drive? A, drinking wine, B, exercise, C, eating sugar, or D, sleep?
I mean, I have a personal preference here.
Mine's sleep. I've got 3-year-old twins at home. All righty, let's find out the answer. So we may think it's wine or sleep, but as most people here know, exercise is the best way to increase your libido.
I object. For me, it's drinking wine.
There we go. How many nerve endings does the clitoris have? A, 25, B, 8,000, C, 1 million, or D, 2,500?
I mean, it's all quite a lot, isn't it? Do we know how much the penis has?
Less. Okay. Should we move on?
Yeah.
So the correct answer is 8,000.
That's a lot.
Which is twice as many as the penis.
Twice as many.
Twice as many. So what can cause a man to lose his erection? A, alcohol, B, stress and anxiety, C, tiredness, or D, all of the above? So I think it's nearly there, 27 out of 30.
Almost there. But I saw in the chat that some people have trouble with the buttons.
And the correct answer is D, all of the above. So when we pose these questions on Love Matters, whether you got the answer right or wrong, there's always further information, and I'll show you an example of this at the end. So next question. Which is the only method of contraception that protects from STIs, HIV, and prevents pregnancy? I'm hoping that most of us here will get this right.
I really hope so. Can you see who gets them wrong? That
No.
might put additional pressure on people.
There's no naming and shaming here.
No naming and shaming. Okay, good. All right, almost there. Yes.
So condoms, if used consistently and correctly, are
Oh, this is encouraging.
method that both protects from STIs, HIV, and prevents pregnancy. So on average, how long does it, sorry, sharing my screen, how long does it take for the average man to ejaculate during sexual intercourse? A, 28 minutes, B, 2.2 minutes, C, 12 minutes, or D, 5.4 minutes?
I mean, yeah, on average, we're talking, huh? Because
Exactly.
it differs a lot.
This is based on research from the Journal of Sexual Medicine on vaginal penetration.
Right.
Move on, 2 more people to answer.
Yeah, I think we can move on. Yeah.
So the correct answer is D, 5.4 minutes is the average amount of time taken. So next question, which of these birth control methods is not totally reversible? A, the contraceptive implant, B, the IUD, C, sterilization, or D, the contraceptive pill?
I can see a comment from Simon popping up. Thank you, Simon. Feel free to join in the conversation if you like. All right.
Correct. Yep.
All right.
Sterilization is the only method that is not totally reversible. So the method chosen by people who either have completed their families or do not want to have children. So which of the following cannot transmit HIV? A, kissing, B, unprotected anal sex, C, unprotected vaginal sex, or D, sharing needles or syringes?
How many more questions do we have, Charlotte? Huh?
I'm going to move on. Correct. I'm so glad everyone got that one right.
Yeah. It's a very consistent rumor, though, that you can get it from kissing.
Last question. What year were colored and flavored condoms first developed?
Now, this is a question I like. You know, we have a wonderful shop in Amsterdam.
Yes,
which is yeah, the Condomerie, which has amazing flavors, everything that you have never. Sometimes I feel like it's like a Harry Potter shop of you know, all of these magical flavors, but then on condoms.
Haven't you ever wanted to fried chicken, or I think we garlic, whiskey, and bacon flavored condoms? That doesn't sound
the whiskey one.
appetizing, but really flavored condoms are intended to increase pleasure and make using condoms more pleasurable and fun. So the answer is 1995.
95. All
That's
right.
the end of our little quiz. As you can see here, I've just shared a screenshot of how the quizzes actually look on the Love Matters websites when you play them on your phone. And as I mentioned before, if you click on an answer, it tells you whether you're correct or incorrect, but also gives you some more further information on why the answer is either right or wrong. And also you can see here, learn more about this topic. So a user can click on this, and on a separate tab or browser, an article within the Love Matters website will pop up with further information on the specific topic. So the learner can really dive further in if needed. Alrighty, Elianne, back to you.
All right. If you can stop sharing your
I
screen.
will stop sharing my screen.
So in the last bit of the webinar, I want to share with you some of the results that are also in the infographic. So Lotte, unfortunately, you have to leave, but you can still find the results in the infographic. So also for everyone who does need to leave early, this is being recorded. So you can always watch it back sometime. I'm sure Hannah can facilitate the sharing of the recording. So a question for you, Charlotte, is this game designed for young people to play in a group and a facilitator is required? Well, I can also answer this question. So no, we've only decided to take this approach for this particular webinar because it's a little bit nicer to play this together than for all of us individually. So normally this quiz is integrated on the websites of our various platforms and young people can play them by themselves as they enter that website. Now there was another question about from Elizabeth, I think, about sharing the scores. So especially with the Are You a Sexpert one, and I want to point out here because it makes me happy, the elements of the psychological basic needs that we discussed in the beginning about self-determination theory, you can see them coming back in this quiz. There's the sense of autonomy, control, where you control what answers you put in. Then there's the sense of achievement, right? The competence. If you get a high score, I mean, you should see the responses on Facebook from people who play that, who just go around waving their scores because they feel like they're a sexpert, which is of course why we use that title, because who doesn't want to be a sexpert, right? And the third one, which one am I missing? We have competence, autonomy, and relatedness, competition. So this is about feeling like you are achieving something, you might be a little bit better than your friends. Bragging rights, Camille, that's exactly right. So a quiz like this gives you bragging rights. So there are sharing buttons, which are also used. And as I will show you in the results section, there was also a lot of people sharing the individual links. Let me just go back to my PowerPoint. All right. So the results. 10,000 users played the quiz over a course of 6 weeks. So for our monitoring and evaluation purposes, we had a 6-week window after which we closed data collection. The quizzes are still online and we're still collecting data on that. But for this particular research pilot, we had a 6-week window. We had more than 10,000 users playing a quiz over the course of 6 weeks, distributed over 4 different regional platforms. And the first observation is that most of the users entered the quizzes through social media. And this is with a lot of credit to Gabriella, who designed the engagement strategy, as well as all of the moderators in the local teams, who did a great job creating engagement around this. In total, the quizzes, so both the self-assessment journeys and the quizzes all together, were completed 10,900 times. And just to show you a little bit more about completion rates, we can see here that 67% of the self-assessment journeys were completed versus 44% of the quizzes. Now, the reason, and of course we are, what's the word, like guessing a little bit, but educated guess, I might add. The reason we think is because self-assessment journeys are generally more tailored to people's personal situations. They have usually less questions than a quiz. And so it's more likely that people actually finish filling that in, whereas the quizzes have longer questions and tend to be a little bit more challenging. However, the quizzes were more popular than the self-assessment journeys, and this had a lot to do with the Are You a Sexpert quiz, which just generated a lot of excitement among people. We also had a look at gender and age distribution, because we asked users if we could place a form of a cookie called a Facebook pixel. We could get some information about their demographics. And we found that in line with our general audience, the age groups were between 18 and 35 years old. So about 90% of all the people that played a quiz was in that young people category. And in terms of gender, and I have 2 countries here that had enough data to be able to say something meaningful about gender distribution, we saw something interesting. You have to realize that for Kenya on top and Egypt on the bottom there, for both of these platforms in general, we have quite a balanced audience between men and women. This is something we see in our general digital analytics. But for the quizzes, we can see that men have a slightly more of a tendency to play these quizzes. Again, I'm an amateur psychologist, but I sort of think that this might have something to do that men might feel like they want to have those bragging rights about feeling, like a sexpert. In order for this to really know, we would have to do more extensive research, of course. So this is a little bit guessing from the side, but it is an interesting pattern here that men do tend to play these quizzes a little bit more than women. And so a follow-up question could be how we can make these quizzes perhaps more engaging for women. So my favorite results have to do with 3 quality metrics. Now, don't confuse quality with quantity, because in the sense that these are quantitative metrics, but they say something about the quality of users visiting our platform. And what we did is first we looked at session duration, which is a digital analytics metric that looks at how much time people spend browsing your specific website. And we saw impressively that users who play a game spend 6 times longer on the website than users who do not play a game. And thanks to Gabriella's Google Tag Manager settings, we could very easily compare users who play a game versus users who don't play a game. And secondly, for those users who actually played a game, they visited twice the number of pages. Pages per session is the metric that we use here. So we see that not only do they access the page where the quiz is on, they're also more likely to click through to other pages on your website, which for us as an online sort of digital SRHR information provider is very relevant to know, because we really want to keep people interested in the diverse content that we have. And related to this is the bounce rate. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with digital analytics, a bounce rate is a very interesting metric, because what it does, it tells you how interested people are in the page that you have on your website. So imagine a user visiting your article on contraception. When the bounce rate is very high, it means that a lot of people don't even interact with your page. They enter on it, and then without doing anything, they exit. And this is a bad sign, because it means that they're not particularly engaged by the content that you have provided to them. So you want to lower that bounce rate as much as possible. You want to make sure they click, they scroll, they move on to another page. And we found out for the pages that had a form of game on it, so one of those quizzes on it, the bounce rate decreased with 1/3, which is a huge achievement. Something I didn't expect, and I was very, very pleased to see. So with these 3, you can see that such a simple intervention as adding quizzes, but integrating them in your content strategy and in your learning cycle can really improve the way people engage with that type of information. I also looked at some of the more qualitative information. So I started analyzing some of the comments that we got on the quizzes on Facebook. And here you can see that people love to report back their scores. So this one person says, I scored 7 out of 11. I could retake the test, but that would be cheating. And this made me laugh, because I could also see on the back end of the third-party quiz app that we used, I can also see how many people put in the right versus wrong answers. I cannot see who, but just the amount of right or wrong answers. And I noticed that there was a weird pattern where there was an unlikely number of people that got every single answer correct. Now, I don't know if you just got all of the answers correctly in the quiz that Charlotte hosted, but I didn't the first time, and also not the second time. So what that tells me is that people are probably retaking the quiz to get as many good answers as possible. And then they come back on Facebook and they start bragging about the sexpert that they are because they got 100%. So with these results, we can now safely say that we have had a very successful pilot, and that gamification, when integrated well, and I cannot stop emphasizing that, can make a huge improvement in young people's engagement with SRHR information. However, this was a prototyping pilot. So this was a very, very small pilot designed to be a foundation for further development and follow-up research. So in terms of looking ahead, we're of course looking to scale up quiz formats. We've tried 2 different quizzes on 3 different topics on 4 different platforms. And we have many more platforms that could benefit from it. We have many more topics that could benefit from it. So in addition to scaling up, we are also looking to pilot new and other types of gamification. One of the things that I can think of from the top of my head is that you add polling elements on your website where you can ask very quick and easy questions where young people can give their input, which provides you with ongoing information about what is happening with young people, how they feel about certain topic and what they're looking for. And thirdly, we also want to invest a little bit more in investigating knowledge retention, because that's the one thing we couldn't do in this pilot, is really dig a little bit deeper in not only whether young people are engaging with information, but whether they're also actually retaining the knowledge that comes out of that. So that would be a great topic for follow-up research. So as a last slide, I want to talk about some of the recommendations. I hope that you've become a little bit more excited about using gamification, while at the same time also keeping in mind some of the key lessons. So the first one is that it's all about the journey. And I really want to emphasize that don't treat gamification like an isolated product or process. You cannot create a game, put it on a website and expect it to do wonders. That's not how it works. So if you want to make the most out of this process, make sure you know what the learning cycle behind it is and how you connect it to the journey of the user. And remember that there are multiple journeys possible. So we invested a lot in creating engagement through social media, but specifically on our Love Matters Arabic and the Hablemos de Sexo y Amor in Mexico, we found out that there was actually a very large percentage of people reaching the quizzes through organic traffic. So organic traffic means that they have not gone there through social media or through advertisement, but they've actually ended up there because they were Googling for topics and ended up on your website. So there are multiple journeys possible. In addition, we have the playfulness. Don't shy away from humor and informal language, especially when you work with young people. And I guess I don't really have to tell you this, but yeah, try to keep it light and mix up educational content with fun content. I know, Ema-Olori, are you by any chance still in there? I don't know, Charlotte, if you can see it, but if Emma is there, because Emma, I know that you had some interesting tips and recommendations as well around using playful language for young people. Do you want to say a little bit more about that?
Yes, indeed. Elianne. Thanks. I really think that we can transform our digital learning platforms, but just learning altogether into something much less sterile and impersonal for young people. What we find is that young people really don't want to be told what to do. But they still do have a lot to learn, and as such you want to be able to make them feel or own their own learning, and they need to feel in control, just like you mentioned a couple of times. They need to feel like they are directing the learning, but we're simply facilitating, and what that results in is really a very impersonal way that you present learning materials for them. It's a lot less, autocratic and a lot more democratic for them. And it's pleasant. It encourages learning, and that's our final outcome. That's what we really want to achieve.
And that also relates to the third point about context being essential here, and language is a big part of that. And I want to remind you of your awkward teenage years where your parents try to be cool and tell you stuff like it's rad or chill, and you would feel very, very awkward. Don't be that person. If you're thinking about contextualizing, gamification, or other types of processes and products, make it easy for yourself and involve the audience so that you don't have to try and think and come up with cool language. Just make sure that whoever you're doing this for, involve them in contextualizing and adapting, for example, the quiz. And a second point that I want to add here is to consider the digital environment. This is something that we found out halfway through in DRC specifically. We realized, or we got reports back from our moderators there, that they got a lot of feedback from users who said, I don't know how to play this quiz. How does it work? I don't understand. And it turned out that a lot of users used a type of Facebook that doesn't require an internet connection, which is nice, but then it also means that you cannot access any external domains. So they could see the link to the quiz, but they couldn't access it. A lot of our moderators also mentioned that a lot of users seem to be confused because they have never really done a quiz like that before. So before you go into this, make sure you keep an eye on how users perceive these quizzes and whether you can adapt a little bit to the digital environment. Do they have enough internet, like a digital penetration rate, internet penetration rate, but also are they used to playing quizzes? How are they used to playing quizzes? Can you maybe adapt that a little bit so that it's more likely to be successful? And my last and favorite one, iterate, iterate, iterate. I'm going to keep this short because I mentioned it before. Yes, you can think big, but no, you have to start small. Really try to reduce those risks for yourself. Start small, make sure you test it very well by planning these quick evaluation moments so that you can actually make those adjustments during the implementation phase rather than finding out at the end that you could have tried something differently. So at that, I want to open up some space for questions. I am just going to stop sharing so that I can see the chat.
There are a few questions in the chat, so should we begin with those?
Yeah, I don't want to miss anything. So do you know where to start?
So there's a question from Simon. What do you do about shy participants who sign up to the quiz but don't respond to questions because they don't want to get the answers wrong, for example? I think that's a really good question. So actually the quizzes and the self-assessment journeys are housed on the Love Matters website. So the participants don't need to sign up. They can interact with the quiz completely anonymously when and where it suits them. So I think that's really overcomes that obstacle for us a lot of the time. Wouldn't you say, Elianne?
Yeah, absolutely. And I see the question below that from Sally about how to adapt this in grassroots communities where internet connection is problematic and many don't have Android. I just want to look at Camille. I don't know if you have particular insight into this or whether you would like me to take that on.
Well, I can give a quick answer. It's not the given solutions to this question, but of course, in general, before implementing or even developing a digital product, you need to make sure that it's going to be usable by your users. What your users need come first, really. And if internet connection is problematic and many don't have an Android, then you need to think of another way to bring up gamification. That could be, for instance, maybe in that case, an app could be a good idea because it can be used without internet connection. So you have to explore all the digital products that are out there, and of course, adapt them to what your user needs first.
And this is also, yeah, what we did with looking at a third-party application rather than designing itself. Just because you can doesn't mean you have to. And it has a lot to do with preparing and understanding the context to the point where don't make that rookie mistake of designing a wonderful quiz and implementing it in a context where there's barely any digital penetration rate. This is stuff that you can avoid by doing your research beforehand and looking at the different applications that are available to cover this. And there's another question from Sai about, do you think young women and girls face particular barriers to engage with sexuality education games? I don't know, Charlotte, if you have an opinion about this.
Yeah, well, I think that was one thing we were discussing yesterday when we were looking at some of the metrics that came out. I mean, that you know, when we look at the quiz, there were far more male respondents than female. And actually, when you look at overall on our sites, the users tend to be much more kind of equal, right? So we were wondering about that. I think Elianne mentioned earlier, is it because of, you know, more competitive nature, or is it because of access?
And it's something that oh, sorry, Camille, you wanna?
Yeah, just I mean, it's just a guess on the top of my head, but it might also be time on screen might also play. Maybe it's if a girl or a woman want to check information, for instance, about STD or something, they want to maybe have a quick answer and spend not a lot of time on screen because, I don't know, they are more at risk if someone, you know, sees them on the screen looking about STDs. And of course, taking a test, for instance, about STD, it's going to take way longer. So maybe that's also something.
And these, I think, are all good reasons why there's a lot more follow-up research to do about better understanding. So for us, these analytics have shown to us a pattern about women versus men engagement. And this is a great reason to start investigating a little bit more what the reason might be that women tend to engage a little bit less, whether it has to do with their environment, whether it has to do with their psychological need to be competitive. There's a lot of different reasons here. So there's another question from Agnes or Agnes from about the iteration point. And you're asking, how easy was this for you to implement across your team? And I'm thinking about the mindset here, given that usually international development doesn't really work in an agile way. Yeah, you hit the nail, and then what's the word? The nail with the hammer or something like that. Yes, I'm not very good with English proverbs. Yeah, it's a very good point. And for RNW Media, this is something that we've started experimenting more with in the last few years. We are lucky in the sense that because of our digital background, we do have a lot of people working in the organization that have more experience with that type of iterative approaches. But it is a challenge, and I can encourage you to start trying it out. I'm sure you have smaller projects that you can try this out with. For us, it was fairly easy because we had a small project team, and each of us had our own broader project teams also in the different countries that we were working with. But we were able to just meet every week, discuss the metrics, and make adaptations where necessary. You're going to have everyone on the same page. So at the start, you agree that this is how you want to do it. And don't expect magically that iteration will happen. You have to plan for it. So you have to have those meetings planned for. You have to be willing to make changes. Because yeah, this doesn't happen magically by itself. You really have to plan for it. I don't know if Gabriella, Camille, whether you want to add to that, because both of you have some experience with this.
My experience in this sector is not as broad as yours, but when we talk about innovation, it's usually something that people tend to get very excited about. And if you start looking into design thinking, things can be made very visual, which can also excite people inside the organization. So my tip would be pick a small project, a project that you truly believe, and maybe have like 2 or 3 people on board that also can sell that together with you, and have this periodic planning. Like when you say we are going to meet every week to discuss, it's not like a meeting that we are going to sit down there and speak for 2 hours. It's like really supposed to be brief. So we are going to meet for half an hour to 1 hour max and present the results. Everyone has very clear and specific tasks, and that's why it works. No one wants more meetings. No one wants more like listening. So make use of all the different methodologies. If you just like Google design thinking methodologies, you can see how you can run meetings in a more quicker way, a more effective way, more interesting way. And this is going to be a learning that you're going to take for any project that you are going to do afterwards, even if they are in the more traditional.
And it doesn't have to be perfect from the start. Hey? You
Exactly.
just start with practicing, start with adding new little processes, start with the ambition to make meetings 30 minutes instead of 1.5 hours. That could be a nice way to start. And I think what helped us a lot is that because gamification is such an integrated method, I had to work with Gabriella, I had to work with Camille, I had to work with Charlotte, because I was responsible for the data collection, but I needed every single person to help me actually get to the point where I would get you good data. So in other projects, my experience is that sometimes as an M&E specialist, I sort of come in at the end and I collect the data and I write my report, and then it's sort of done. But with this project, in order to even get solid data, I needed to work with all of these people. And I think that also helps in sort of making these adjustments, because no one is solely responsible for this. We were all having this shared responsibility to make this work. And Luciano, I see your comment, and it reminds me indeed with people retaking the quiz. I actually love that, because normally, yes, it might be considered cheating, but when it's about educational purposes, yes, please retake the quiz and get every answer right, because when it comes to knowledge retention, nothing is as good as people retaking the quiz to put in all the right answers to make sure they actually start remembering that information. So yeah, incentivizing people, that's a difficult word, is also very helpful. And incentives you can do in different ways. We have an incentive by giving people a score and a little statements like, wow, you're a sexpert. Or, well, maybe you should try again until you're also a sexpert or something. But you can also think of other ways of you know what I mean, incentivizing. Yeah.
But I think also we had to be careful again with, like I mentioned earlier, the fact that the quizzes are done anonymously.
Yeah.
So there's only that, you know, we can't give out specific diplomas or super user stickers, because then people would have to log in, and that's something we want to avoid, for exactly the comment earlier, to make sure it's as inclusive to all to take the quiz as possible.
Yeah, exactly. And this again is also about user journeys. Don't assume every person that you're building this for is the same. You have men, you have women, you have younger people, older people. You have people who want to brag, you have people who want to keep it anonymous. Like, don't treat them as one homogeneous group of people, because they're not. The last question I see is which third-party app we use. Oh, sorry, Camille, do you want to interrupt?
Yeah, I also want to add something to Luciano's comment, actually, about the incentivizing. Well, but
Such a difficult word.
Complicated word. But indeed, as Charlotte mentioned, it's something that we thought about, and the idea of a digital diploma, we discarded it for the anonymity concern and, you know, logging in, etc., but also for just the capacity with, you know, the small grant, like, wouldn't cover like creating such a big technical process. But I feel like with the engagement strategy, actually, that Gabriella developed with the different community managers, this was done in that way, you know, having all the community manager encouraging people to share their results, asking them like, hey, if you're a sexpert, comment here, like, what's your test, what's your results, etc. So it was done, yeah, not in a techie way, let's say, but just more as the same way as community building. Yeah, just
thanks. Yeah, it's a good addition. Shravan, you're asking for which third-party apps we have used. So the third-party app that we used was Riddle, which was quite a nice way to start experimenting with this this format. Of course, with any third-party app, there are limitations, also in the data collection. So it wasn't perfect, but it was really good for just the prototyping phase. So for the future, we might choose to do a different type of app. But if you're just trying it out, then yes, I think it worked really well. So we have a couple of more minutes. I think we've covered all of the questions. If there are any burning questions, this is the moment to put them in the chat. And otherwise, yes. So to connect and exchange on a few ideas. So yeah, I'm so happy you're mentioning the Mazaruna project. So we are actually intending to work more with gamification in the partnerships with like Mazaruna, but also with Right Here, Right Now. I'm just going to show the slide with our contact details so that if you're interested, please feel free at any time to contact us. And yeah, and everything else, just thank you for attending. Also for the ones watching this recording later, thank you for watching the recording. And I want to give a specific thanks to my colleagues Charlotte, Gabriella, Camille, and Ema-Olori for joining me and answering these questions. And of course, Hannah. Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
And Sharon.
Yeah.
Thanks to all of you.
Thank you,
and
Hannah.
for all the active participants today. It was a lovely session. Thank you so
It
much.
was all made possible by a small grant from Shanna, so let's not forget that.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Have a lovely day, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.